I'm Daisy.
And I'm Terri.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 139. And this week it is Terri's turn to share something with us. Terri, what have you got for us today?
Well, Daisy, this week I went to a new podcast, or one that I don't remember if I've ever pulled from it before.
Another new one. You've been getting pretty adventurous lately.
That's right. And the podcast is called The Happiness Lab, and it is with a psychologist named Dr. Laurie Santos. And one of the things I like about podcasts like this is it covers a lot of different topics, and some are health related, and some are lifestyle related and entertainment related and things. And so the title of this episode was The Secret to Making Friends as an Adult.
Mm-hmm.
And I have alluded to this before, but I can't tell people how excited I feel when I find a book or a podcast episode that basically reiterates something that I have been saying for years. And then I think, wait a minute, this person wrote about this or talked about this as if it's brand new. I've been talking about it for years. Oh, that's right. I didn't write the book or create a podcast about it. But anyway, I used to say this.
I promise you, I came up with it first.
That was my idea. And I guess that really just goes to prove that even when I thought of it, it wasn't a novel idea. But I often have that discussion with people about when we were kids, creating a friendship was so easy. It just happened naturally. Like you just fell into friendships. And I actually use this example. When I was in third grade, I was new to the school actually. And one day it was during break, lunch or recess or something. And I'm in the bathroom, and I went to the bathroom washing my hands. And this girl is standing behind me in line to wash her hands. And she looks at me and I look at her, and she's like, "Hey, do you want to be friends?" I said, "Okay." And we were friends. It doesn't work quite like that now. I never become friends with someone I just met while standing in line in the bathroom. So this episode just kind of jumped out at me a little bit because I am challenged by this, how to make friends in adulthood. But the episode itself honestly spent a little less time giving you the secret to how to make friends as an adult, but really just talking a little bit more about the importance of it and then a few suggestions. So this episode really is only the host of the episode doing the whole episode, but she brings in segments and quotes and things from other people. So it's not like an interview type of episode. And the first person that she talked about is Vivek Murthy, who I didn't know, and anyone in the US might look down upon me for not knowing this, but he is the Surgeon General and has been for quite some time.
Of course. I was trying to remember how I knew the name. He's been on Rangan Chatterjee's podcast, I think. Yeah, really nice guy. Yeah.
It's been the Surgeon General under, I think, 3 presidents. So it's been quite a while for me not to recognize this name. But interestingly, and this is probably one of the things he's talked about on
Rangan I think I know what you're going to say. Yeah.
It's talking about loneliness.
Yeah.
And they kind of start the episode talking a little bit about his childhood experience. He was new to town. His parents had moved to the country and moved to this country. And so he was new, and talked about how lonely he was. But he tried to cover it because he didn't want his parents feeling bad. He didn't want them to have one more task added to their list of things. And now, in his role as Surgeon General, one of his missions is to really focus on loneliness because of its prevalence and also because of its consequences. So,
yeah, that's the bit I remember from the episode I listened to, the impact on health. Yeah.
So they talked a bit about loneliness and, social connection and things. And why is it that he focuses on this, and why is this important to a Surgeon General? And he talked about then the idea that loneliness can actually have devastating effects physically for people. It's strongly associated with increased risk of heart disease, dementia, depression, and anxiety, all things that we all would like to do without. And also people with fewer social contacts or less connectedness also experience something he referred to as fragmented sleep. So even if they sleep the same number of hours as others, the sleep is broken up by micro awakenings. And this affects how restful the sleep is and how restorative the sleep is.
Wow. So,
and when I heard this,
you wouldn't think it would impact sleep.
Yeah. But when I heard this, I thought, oh my gosh, I need to think about this, because I probably brag about this a little bit, but my sleep is very broken. And I joke in that I kind of like that. Like, I'll sleep for 3 or 4 hours and then I'll wake up and then I'll do some things and then I'll go back to sleep, or I'll listen to something. And I thought, how much of that may be caused by micro awakenings and might be actually the root of that being loneliness. So one mega study, a researcher looked at 100 different studies looking at the connection between longevity and social connections. And what they found is that people with strong social bonds were 50% less likely to die over a specific period of time that was looked at in this study than those with fewer social connections. So having stronger, better social connections actually 50% decrease risk of dying. Now, as we talked about in a previous episode, I'm always a little skeptical of any social science research because of all of the compounding factors in something like that. Mm-hmm. And they did talk about the idea that this tended not to weed out negative relationships. An interesting fact about it, though, was that the degree of life shortening that was associated with fewer social connections was very similar to the impact of smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Wow.
And we all know the danger of smoking. And it was actually above that of obesity and sedentary lifestyle.
Wow.
So I know that we've all heard warnings about obesity and sedentary lifestyle affecting our mortality outcomes and our longevity, but to think that loneliness actually ranks above obesity and sedentary lifestyle as negative impact. He also talked about the idea that 1 in 5 adults studied actually admit to struggling with loneliness, but oftentimes we don't recognize it as we might with how many people struggle with obesity or struggle with other health things or who smoke. Those are things that we can see more tangibly. And most of us kind of learn to cover our loneliness, to mask it, to look as if we're not lonely or struggling with loneliness. And some of us even learn to convince ourselves that our lack of social connections is for good cause. Like, we're really busy. We're so busy with work. We don't really have time to connect with people. And so it's kind of justifiable. So we may think that our limited social connections are kind of justifiable. They're just nature of the busyness of life or our career or something. But we fail to see that there are actually serious consequences to us about this. We talked about the idea that we might need to do a variety of things to achieve our social connection needs, that it's not just one thing that we all probably need to start doing more of or less of. And then he went into talking a little bit about 3 types of loneliness. He described intimate loneliness, which is lacking a close bond with a confidant, someone who knows you deeply and that you know deeply. Now, from intimate loneliness, this does not mean the lack of a romantic partner or something, but just an intimacy, a deeper really knowing.
Well. Yeah.
Right. The next one he talked about is relational loneliness, basically lacking friendships. Having people that you can connect with, go places with, give them a call and go see a movie together, just people that you can interact with. And then the third type he talked about, collective loneliness. And this is when we don't have the benefit of identifying with a group. And this was talked about a little bit more in this episode too, but the idea that so many of us find our social connection through a group of people who share some type of common interest or reason, just like how you and I first met. It's a lifestyle and eating approach, a health piece, but it could be religion, it could be political thing, it could be a charity that people are interested in.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the first thing that came to my mind when you started talking about this, and how it's not as easy as when you're a kid, when you're at school. Well, of course, when you're at school, you're all thrown together, and so it's how important context is. And although you're not going to be friends with everyone who's in that school, you're throwing a load of potential friends into a safe group environment, so you kind of can turn around to the person who's behind you in the queue and say, hey, you want to try out being friends, kind of thing. You kind of can do that. It's very different from doing that in the big wide world as an adult. As I was thinking of the difference between people who have like a good friendly work environment becomes a sort of school of adults. So the big difference for people who don't go to work in an office or something where there's a group of people that are automatic potential friend groups, or like you're saying, going to church or some kind of hobby that you do. If you work from home on your own, you can see how you're not in that day-to-day context opportunity like you had when you went to school.
Absolutely.
Obviously, I'm talking to people who go to school, not homeschooling. That's a whole different thing. But you know what I mean? It's that automatic potential friend pool that you've got that you don't necessarily have as an adult.
And that's really a big piece of this, in that so many of those automatic built-in places that used to be the case aren't so much. The host of the show then started talking about a book that she read in graduate school called Bowling Alone. And I had to laugh a little bit about this, like, oh, goody. Sociological piece on bowling. But what the person went through in the book, what she described from this book, is that in the 1950s, Americans were very active in bowling leagues. Many people belonged to a bowling league. But by the 1990s, this was not so much the case. And in general, they preferred bowling alone. So what we get is a collective loneliness is on the rise, because some of these built-in ways that people used to connect are not as prevalent these days. And kind of what you just described and touched on in there is so many of our things nowadays, especially post the beginning of COVID, is more and more things are online. More and more things are solo, different ways of connecting via all of the technology we have, versus in the 50s, you had to go to the bowling alley, or you had to go to church, or you weren't going to have social interactions with people. And as you said, at that time, if your social connections were through work, you were at the factory, or you were in the work setting or in the office, whereas now so much of it is done remotely, even school. So many kids do schooling remotely. So a lot of these things that were natural places for us to satisfy those collective needs aren't the same. And so again, collective loneliness is on the rise. She then shares some pieces of an interview with someone named Casper Turkle. And this person, I don't remember the background, but they were very much involved in looking at and studying religion, which was kind of interesting because they were atheist. But talked about, in the past, you used to have to participate in these groups as a means of survival. It was a means of not being socially outcast and having connection. And some research shows that people who are involved in religious communities tend to be happier. And anyone who maybe isn't involved in a religious community or is skeptical of that, they looked at it a little further, and it wasn't actually about the values of the religious group or anything about that. It was, they tended to be happier because it reduces collective loneliness. You're going to services, you're working on projects with people, you're sharing some values and some beliefs with people. And you kind of touched on this with what you said a moment ago, Daisy. is then I think nowadays we have to think about, where are those opportunities for me now? I work from home. I don't go to church, blah, blah, blah. How am I going to have those needs met? And one of the things that he mentioned in this part, Casper mentioned, is gyms. And I definitely thought of CrossFit gyms as a great example, but Pilates, yoga, aerobics, when different dance ways of exercising have become really popular, people tend to make friends there. They find people who share something in common with them and kind of build their social network. So focus on the idea of, even that might be taking classes, some form of communal learning environment, gyms, classes, could be pottery class, it could be learning a new health thing that you're interested in.
Like you say, it's an automatic something in common that you've got, a shared interest. It's a good way to start a conversation, which is half the battle, isn't it? If you're looking to make new friends, is you've got to have something to start a conversation, start a potential friendship.
That's right. And if I'm remembering this part of the discussion correctly, he actually started some groups about a shared book. So it doesn't even mean that we took a class together, but we've read a book. We've read a similar thing. And then I'm thinking, yeah, that's right. Book clubs have become such, over the past 10, 15 years, such a way that people make friends or maintain friendships.
Yeah, people joke, don't they? It's more about the glass of Chardonnay and the chit chat than it is about talking about the book.
But the book is the common thing that brings you together. And so he started some connections around reading Harry Potter books. And suddenly it grew. And I don't even remember, it was at some point like 10,000 people or something. He wasn't purposely trying to start a Harry Potter following group of friends, but it just naturally grew by starting a couple of groups. So having a shared text, and I think about in my work with the fasting method community, many people started with reading a particular book or following a particular YouTube, and suddenly they're all connecting and supportive of each other. In this part of the podcast, she then kind of transitions into talking about another resource. And this woman's name is Marissa Franco, who is also a psychologist and is an expert on friendships. And she wrote a book called Platonic. And talking a little bit about the difference between the value maybe in platonic relationships versus romantic relationships, and the idea that you don't have to navigate a lot of the mundane, challenging things of life. Like, you don't have to really do your taxes with your friends or do these things, but they can be so important in navigating other areas in your life and having common connections and things. And she shared a couple of interesting thoughts in that, in general, research kind of shows that every 7 years, we can lose about half of our friends. People move away, people's life changes in a way that makes them less accessible, or your life changes or things. Friendship circles have been shrinking over the past 30 years. And some research on friendship shows that about 50% of folks would like to make new friends if only they knew how. So I thought that was interesting, that many of us are aware. We want to increase our social connections. We want to increase our friendship base, but don't always feel like we know how. And then this is where really the theme of this whole episode came up. And she's like, it's just not so natural. Like when we were young, then it was just the shared experience. You went to summer camp together and you became best friends. And it doesn't happen quite so easily now.
Yeah, I think that shared experience part is key, actually, isn't it? For an easy way in.
And it's still possible in adulthood, but there are more complex things.
You've got to engineer it a bit more.
That's right. And we do have more limitations on us now as adults. Like, we each have our own families or home that we're navigating, and our own responsibilities and work and schedules and financial resources. When that girl standing in the bathroom asked me if I want to be friends, we weren't like, well, let's see if our schedules line up. And if you have the right stuff, then we can. No, it was just, hey, you're here, I'm here, let's be friends. Another theme that kind of happened throughout this whole episode is that our mind tends to lie to us about loneliness. Many of us don't recognize how lonely we are or how lonely other people are. And emotional isolation and how friendship works is another concept where our mind often deceives us. Some people assume that friendships do just happen, and we say, well, I just want it to happen organically. But that, again, as we've discussed, isn't really how it happens in adulthood. And studies show that people who believe friendships happen based on luck tended to be lonelier over time. And those who thought that they were based on effort tended to be less lonely. So they knew they were going to have to put in some conscious effort and intention in creating friendships. Time is another big factor. We often see our availability of time as a barrier for social connections. And I'm busy, you're busy. Oh, never mind. We're never going to be able to get together. Again, not an issue when I was in third grade. She also talked about our social anxiety as a reason that we often struggle to initiate and make new friends as adults. She talked about a common cognitive bias known as the liking gap. And I thought this was really interesting. Studies have been done where they have subjects interact with strangers across a number of different settings. And in general, people tend to underestimate how much the people liked them. So after these interactions, they would check with them, like, do you think that person liked you? And what they found is people generally underestimate how much those people like them. Whereas the other subjects actually said, yeah, I really liked her. I thought he was interesting. That's not what they perceived. So she recommended really kind of reminding yourself, priming yourself that people will accept and like you to help deter this bias. Because if we go into social settings thinking, well, it's probably unlikely anyone's really going to like me, we are going to set ourselves up to protect ourselves. Our brain teaches us to do certain behaviors so that we don't have to feel rejected. You walk into the party, pull up your phone, start scrolling. You won't feel rejected then because you weren't even open to connection. So we might go to a new class, but we're intending to meet people, but at the end of the class, we just scoot out the back door real quick before anyone can even talk to us. That's a protective thing that our mind tells us, go ahead, avoid being rejected. And if you're someone who struggles with social anxiety, this certainly is probably amplified. That in order to avoid social rejection, we engage in protective behaviors, but in reality, these increase the likelihood that we're going to feel rejected, because what actually happens is the other person feels less of our engagement. So if someone meets me at the party and I pull out my phone and start texting someone, I'm doing that maybe to protect me, but in reality, I'm almost assuring they're going to feel somewhat rejected, or they're going to feel I'm less likable because I'm not available. So these protective things that we do can actually kind of shoot us in the foot. So our social opportunities are often more within our control than what we've learned to believe. People who are good at making friends, it's not some special talent they have, but instead it's that they often do things that help the other person feel comfortable and valued. A German researcher named Anna Bruck, she and her colleagues came up with something they called the beautiful mess effect. They said that basically asking others for help, sharing vulnerability, being that kind of beautiful mess attracts people because then they feel valued. They have a role. They can help. They can do something. And they feel good about that. And therefore, they feel good about you and they feel able to connect. Now, obviously, we've all known people probably who fall into the far category of that where they present themselves as needing too much. They overwhelm people. And so there is a balance there. But the piece that I thought was so interesting in this is that we do have to be willing to make ourselves vulnerable. Put down the phone at the party, hang around after the class, check in, have people talk about themselves, ask for help. It's the second time in one day that I've read that as a way to connect with people. be willing to ask for help. It really does set up a dynamic of you sharing a little bit of vulnerability helps the other person fill that role.
Interesting.
Some people are afraid to do this because they think that it will make us feel like too much to someone, like we're a burden.
Yeah.
But actually, it invites them closer to us by showing that we're open and vulnerable and genuine. Sharing ourselves more openly and honestly invites people in. Unless you are a chronic oversharer, then you may need to work on reining that in. So her summary to kind of all of these discussions, and again, I know this didn't lead to any secret of how to make friends, but thoughts about it is we need to summon up some courage to take the hard steps of opening up, sharing ourselves, taking initiative, and making ourselves open to the opportunities rather than using our protective devices. Many of us are surrounded by people but may not be feeling connected and wish we could feel more connected. So a reminder, if that's kind of how you experience this, that it's not about luck. It's not about I'll just happen upon them organically, but more how can I challenge myself and some of the lies that my mind has been telling me so that I can take these risks and get closer to people.
I think that's interesting. There were a few things there that really got me thinking. I wrote a couple of notes to remind myself. I wrote down Weight Watchers. I think that was where I was thinking. I mean, neither of us believe very strongly or at all in the diet that is put forward by Weight Watchers, but the benefit that comes from something like Weight Watchers, and naming the most famous one here. I mean, there are the other, Slimming World and all the rest of it. When they've sort of looked into it, the real benefit that comes from it is the camaraderie of chatting to people and the support network and going to the meetings and, making some friends and chatting through shared problems, finding out about tips and things like that. It's the group support part that is the effective bit of it. And so time and time again, it comes back to this, the opposite of collective loneliness, collective togetherness, the importance of when you're embarking on a lifestyle change of some kind, the importance of finding a group that you can connect with, where you have that shared interest, people that you can learn from, people you can share your problems with, people you can ask for help from, people you can ask for support from, people that you can laugh at yourself with, and all these things. It's very, very important. Haven't there been studies and things that have shown that people are more likely to stick with some kind of change if part of that is tied in with doing it collectively, with a like-minded group?
Absolutely. The power, on so many levels. Making these changes, whatever it is, it's maybe you join a financial investing group and that helps you to make different decisions financially, or a different health group or something, like you said, a weight loss group or an exercise group or something, but that it also meets those other important needs of the social connections. And one of the things that the host of this show highlighted is that, unfortunately, we don't really have guidelines on what are the doses and types and frequency of social connections that we need. But we get that all the time with food and money and exercise, and sleep. You should get this much sleep. You should do this many of this. You should drink this much water. But we don't really have you should have 5 quality social connections a week or a day, or, I don't even know what it would be. And so I think what you just described is having that commonality that brings you together strengthens that progress so much, because it's also enhancing the social connection need.
And presumably it depends from person to person how much social interaction they need or want. I think automatically of whether someone's an introvert or an extrovert. as the sort of stereotypical difference, but some people need more interaction than others. But something that did sort of set some warning bells off, if you like, in my mind was this: you've mentioned a few times about how potentially your mind sort of lies to you about what you need or whether you're lonely or not. And I wondered whether, you said something about we can often end up convincing ourselves that the lack of social interaction we have is for a good reason, for whatever it is. And I wondered if there is a time when you almost have to force yourself to have some social connection. If if you're thinking, well, yeah, I'm an introvert, and I really don't want to do this, and I don't want to do that, and I do better with not interacting with people very often. Whether actually that is the best way forward for some people when you talk about individualizing it, or whether we should kind of be making ourselves interact a bit more, like with a dietary lifestyle change that you make because you know what's good for you, but it might not be what you want to do. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear here, but it was something that was sort of going off in my mind. I'm thinking, how many times do you do that? How many times do you say, oh, actually, I'm happy not really seeing people and just spending time with my dogs, or whatever it is? I wonder if, maybe where we mentioned earlier that you might have to engineer some shared activities, going, like you was talking about, going to the gym or going to a class or going to a book club or whatever it is. You have to engineer these contexts, these situations, these shared activities, these group activities. Whether we have to engineer some of this social connection for our own good, I don't know. Just a few warning bells going off there.
I definitely think that's an important piece. And as you were describing this, I was very much relating to it because I think that's what I say to myself often. I think to myself, well, look, I do a lot of talking at work. I talk to a lot of people. So clearly I'm not lonely. I have lots of interactions with people. And I live in a building with hundreds of people. I say hello to people all the time. But at the same time, I'm very easily one to say, I'm introverted. I like my alone time. I'm fine holding myself up in my apartment and doing jigsaw puzzles and listening to audiobooks. And I think there has to be a balance for most of us. And it doesn't mean it's a 50-50 balance. But I think I can easily delude myself into thinking I don't need any social interaction, And the one example I shared with you in the beginning when they talked about the disrupted sleep or the broken sleep, I thought, oh, shoot, I actually do experience that. Is that a sign that I'm relying a little bit too much on my introversion as a reason for justifying having few social connections? So I think for all of us, as with most things you and I talked about, there is a personalized approach. It's not going to be we all need a certain number of friends or a certain amount of social outings a week or month or whatever. But I feel like I can fall into an extreme sometimes. And then I think of a stereotypical, maybe socially anxious person who does online gaming all day and never comes out of that room. It would probably be easy for them to justify, what do you mean? I talk to people online, I'm fine, but they've not gone out and seen anyone for weeks or months, don't get a lot of those other social needs met. So I definitely think there's a continuum that we all have to assess.
Yes, I think for me, the takeaway is to maybe test those boundaries that you've set up for yourself, test your comfort zone a bit. And you might find that, you don't need that extra bit that you're pushing yourself to, and you can retreat back to that comfort zone, and that's fine. You are happy with it. But I always tie things back to my dogs, but it makes me think of Rocket and how he was before we moved back to, I say we moved back to the UK. He was moving to the UK. He hadn't been here before, but he still is anxious, but he was very anxious, and we would go out for walks, but I was in rural France. We didn't or rarely met other people, rarely met other dogs, wasn't really any traffic. If a car did go past, he would bark at it. I was really worried when we moved here. That was one of the things I thought, crikey, if he's going to bark at every car that goes past, he's going to be barking all the time, because we've gone from rural France, where a couple of vehicles might go down the lane a day, to, cars going past all the time. And I knew what he was like. When someone came round to the house, he would go and hide himself in the furthermost corner he could. He didn't want to interact with them at all. I thought, it's going to be full on. He's going to be in a different environment, a much smaller garden. We're going to have to be walking out on the lead through traffic. There are going to be people. There are going to be other dogs. All these things he's going to have to do. Is he just going to have a nervous breakdown? Basically, I was really, really worried about it. And it did take some adjustment. And, we came into COVID lockdown territory, so we were all shut in the house for 10 days, and they didn't even go down the stairs. They stayed on the ground floor level. And so I was, building up to this. I was really anxious about the first time we went out, and it took some work, and I took some comfort in the fact that he had his bedrock of me. So he had the calm, solid rock of me that I knew would always ground him to a certain extent. And I was confident in that. But pushing him out of that comfort zone in every direction possible has been the making of him. He is a different dog. And people in the dog park who've seen him, who saw what he was like to start with, sees what he's like now. The transformation is incredible. So it just goes to show that sometimes pushing yourself out the comfort zone, and I'm sure if we could have had a conversation, he would have not been up for any of it. He would have said, no, thank you. Let's stay where we are. I do not want to do any of that. Thank you very much. But he had to do it, and he got used to it. And he would now say, looking back on it, I'm glad you pushed me to do all of that, because I'm a much happier dog because of it. So I should maybe learn from Rocket.
Absolutely. While at the same time, my guess is Rocket would not say, I love it so much, I want to go live at the dog park and I would like 7 more dogs in the house. And so, there's still a balance for him.
Yeah.
He likes the socialization. He likes the activity. And then he's had enough, and he needs a little more solitude, needs a little more quiet.
Yeah, that's true. And some days, I can see him getting anxious, and we have to leave early, or we have to avoid certain dogs, or all the rest of it. So it's certainly not let's go from one to the other, and it's always going to be the same. There's that variability with how you're feeling day to day, week to week, month to month as well.
The takeaway for me about this for myself personally is that I want to be more mindful about not using some of those protective devices to avoid rejection or avoid feeling awkward, to take some more risks, because I think I might delude myself a little bit into thinking, oh, I can't be lonely, I'm fine. And recognizing I think there is some more room for the power of social connection in my life.
Definitely. Gosh, yes, lots to think about.
That's right.
Another interesting episode. Thank you very much. I enjoyed that.
Absolutely.
I hope you have a wonderful week.
Take good care, everybody.